Tennessee and Florida, prime time, 6 p.m., 6:30, whatever it is, on ESPN, Tennessee and Florida. Joe, I put an asterisk next to this on our pick'ems on this because I'm so 50-50. Early in the game last week with Tennessee and Austin Peay, Tennessee could not get it rolling. I understand coming out for a quarter flat against an inferior opponent. I do not understand a half, and I sure as hell don't understand it for a game when you're in a dogfight. Joe, they should have been playing Nico Anamaleva, or however you say it. Iamalavea. And the second half of this game, or at least getting him into the fourth quarter. They don't really get him any work that he probably should have gotten because Austin Peay kept it close. Joe, the score was tied 6-6 with 5 minutes left in the second quarter. Now, if I wanted to be petty, I could come out here and I could have clipped me from 6 months ago, almost to the day when me and you kind of went back and forth about their offense. We talked about Josh Heupel, and we had kind of come to the conclusion that, yeah, their system would be the same. But I did say in that episode when we broke down Tennessee, their offense is not going to look like it did with Hendon Hooker. When you change quarterbacks, it's going to look completely different. Joe, 6-6 with 5 minutes left to go in the first half against a – you said you put them in your top 25 of FCF's opponents. Is that right?
Austin Peay, no, actually, Austin Peay is pretty bad. Austin Peay got stomped out in their week 1 game against SIU. They're not a good.
So they're not a good team.
No, they're bad. That was one of the things I was going to bring up. That should have been a blowout. That is a average, very middle of the pack FCS team that they struggled to move the ball against.
I think you might have said Youngstown State.
It was Youngstown that I said. I ranked Youngstown as a top 25
and Elks just said that too. Yeah, Youngstown State.
Yeah.
Joe Milton. So, Joe, I watched all 22 copies today, one being Arkansas, which we'll talk about in a minute, and Tennessee. Joe Milton started that game out 1-8. Now, maybe it's because the uniforms look so bad. I don't know. But, man, I'm going to tell you, their O-line – look, Florida's defensive line showed against Utah. They can play a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I feel about this game, Joe. I really don't. I know that everybody is poo-pooing on Florida. I get it. But they kept the game close against Utah. Now, I get it's backup quarterbacks, but Joe Milton – what has Joe Milton shown for me to feel confident that Florida can't keep this game close? The game is in the Swamp, a rivalry game at night. I don't like this. Now, the flip side of that, Joe Milton can make a statement. Now, the asterisk next to my pick is what I told you today, Joe. I have 24 hours before kickoff, so 6 p.m. on Friday.
Yes.
That I can flip my pick. I picked Tennessee today, but I might flip this to Florida. I might just do it.
I will allow the asterisks. I will allow it. Thoughts on the game, though, specifically Joe Milton here. I had said this in the offseason that I was paused to buy in just yet on him because a lot of times when we've got these big arm quarterbacks, the casuals get excited when you see him, doing the trick shots. Oh, hit the goalpost from 60 yards away. Look how big his arm is. And I even do the same thing sometimes, right? I posted a clip of him from
his
week
name
1.
is Anthony Richardson.
I'm not talking about Anthony Richardson because Anthony Richardson had better touch. But the big issue that we get into here with these guys with huge cannons for arms is that sometimes they don't know how to take a little bit off. And that leads to inaccuracy problems. It leads to poor placement on throws on shorter to more intermediate routes. He can throw one of the best deep balls, if not the best deep ball in all of college football. But the problem is when we try to pack things into that 5 to 15 yard range, I feel like that's where he's missing a ton. So this game, as you're talking about, it's a perfect opportunity for Heupel and this passing game to start to build some momentum. They're playing against a Florida team that's still an SEC opponent. I know that they've struggled. I know that we've spoken negatively on them, but it is still an SEC opponent with really good athletes. This could serve a similar purpose for what Quinn Ewers did against Alabama. I know it's not as difficult as an opponent.
I mean,
But
Joe,
now they
if
have
you beat him by 30, you're going to say, okay, well, Joe Milton's not as bad as everybody thought through the first 2 weeks.
right. My whole point here is that after Quinn played the way that he did and used that to get into rhythm, we're more confident in him. And that whole team is more confident. The same thing here where you're playing a good team. He throws for, 300. He starts to be a little bit more in rhythm. That accuracy starts to look a little bit better. Use this game as a way to lead into that SEC schedule. Get ready to play your opponents. And I think that we need to pay attention to the way that Joe Milton plays in this game.
I completely agree with you, Joe. Their O-line, both teams really, but if we're talking strictly Tennessee, they are trying to paddle upstream without, or they are trying to canoe upstream without a paddle, without Mays in there as their center. Dude, they're getting beat up front by FCS defensive linemen bad. Like Joe Milton got sacked. And look, some of this wasn't on Milton, okay? Some of this, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Like, hey, man, if you snap the ball and immediately your center gets swimmed and you're trying to go through a progression and you don't have time to process and you have to take the sack, that's not on him. They do have a pretty good running game, though.
Yes.
And one thing that I do like is how Heupel, if it's not working offensively, he's going to change it very immediately. He's a good offensive play caller, one of the best offensive play callers in the country. The only thing that I think that could work in Joe Milton's favor here, though, when you turn on that Utah and Florida film, look, the first play of the game, what did Utah do offensively? They took a shot downfield, and it worked for them. You know who else wants to take shots downfield? Tennessee. Can they start shaking off some of this rust like they're the Transformers and Transformers 2? Come on, Megatron, knock off the rust and get things moving downfield. But here's the big thing that I want to take from this, or I at least through 2 weeks. Anybody, and Joe, I have them bookmarked. I am ready to go. Like, these tweets are bookmarked and ready to go. I had everybody telling me that this offense was not going to miss a stride, and people didn't realize just how good Hendon Hooker was. Is it the system? Yes. But you have to have an effective quarterback with high accuracy in this offense to be able to do that. Now, when I mentioned that Milton went 1 for 8, Joe, he did, after starting 1 for 8, went 11 for 12 in his next 12 passing attempts. 9 of those were screens. So when we talk about this, okay, and why that game was so close, they were throwing slant screens, all this kind of short passing game stuff, mainly because of the offensive line and because Joe Milton wasn't in a rhythm. I like that, and then I don't like that because, look, you're getting your quarterback back into the rhythm, but he was inaccurate. I do feel, look, if this game were in Knoxville, I'd come on the show and say, Rocky Top, you'll always be home, sweet home to me. But since this is in the deep down swamp where men wear jean shorts and Tim Tebow jerseys, I do not like this for Tennessee. I'm definitely going to sprinkle a little on the money line. I mean, on the points in Florida, regardless of how I pick the game outright.
So one thing, though, I want to point out here. First of all, I agree that there's a path for Florida to win this game. I think that if Billy Napier,
let's talk about how can they win? How can Florida win?
I actually think that they have an advantage from having already faced Utah. They got out of their way, not out of their way, but they've already played a good, well-coached Power 5 team. And they made a million mistakes, and we talked about that on this show. They know what the mistakes are, and they know how to correct them, and they're at home. It was all pre-snap penalties. It was special teams miscues. That game could have been a very different story had they not made stupid, silly mistakes.
I agree.
Having already been in that difficult setting, they can approach this game and be a little bit better prepared. That's the path for them to win it. Don't make mistakes. Be a little bit more control the pace of the game. But here's one thing I will say to your point about Joe Milton and that Hendon Hooker comparison. I completely agree with that point. But the difference here with Hendon Hooker and Joe Milton, except for their physical attributes, is that Hendon Hooker was the starter for half the season prior and had all that momentum going into the year. Milton didn't have any of that last year, except for the last couple games. And he didn't look great in those last couple games. it's going to take a little time, I think.
He looked
for
okay
him
against Clemson.
Yeah. But my point here is that he didn't have as much time as Hendon to get into that rhythm for everything to hit the ground running. I really think that this could be that opportunity for them to do so. I also am very in on the run game. This is quite possibly the best running back duo in the SEC with Jalen Wright and Jabari Small. One other piece, though, that I want to add to this. One thing that doesn't really get talked about because it was so weak last year. I think that Tennessee has a very underrated pass rush. The name
That front seven's nasty, dude.
James Pierce Jr. Write that name down now. That kid is a freak. He was all over the place. I know it was against Austin Peay, but you see those flashes of just a physical.
He was all over the place against Virginia too.
He could be a game breaker in this game against a weakish offensive line in Florida. He can make some serious plays.
I just want to say this is why bowl games don't matter when it comes to performance on the back end. You know, like he played so well against Clemson. So what? Like, what did that matter? Look, I do think Florida can't keep this close. I do like the home field advantage, but here's the thing for me with Florida. You just don't have the personnel that Tennessee does. From top to bottom, they don't have the personnel. And quite frankly, I don't know if they have the better coaching staff. I really don't. When on paper, when it comes to personnel and coaching, Joe, I don't think Florida beats them in anything. I don't, if you go down the list of personnel like quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, O-line, D-line, linebackers, running backs, special teams, you would probably pick Tennessee as being better in all of those position groups.
Yeah. They're just rusty.
They're correct. So this game could be a blowout. We'll see.